6-barreled mortars, the battle raged and built to such a pitch that I became quite accustomed to it and went about the task as if on street fighting training back at home. We hadn't eaten since leaving England, but I was too busy to be hungry. Casualties were mounting incredibly fast, and in every direction I could see motionless forms of our men cut down in their tracks. Progress was slow, and the battle became more intense as the bridge loomed gradually nearer. With 2 other chaps I did not know, I chased after some Germans in a house. We threw a grenade in and dashed through the door to finish them off with Sten and rifle. Looking around for any more of the enemy, we belted to the rear of the house. I tripped over a broken fence and went sprawling. As I scrambled up, I heard a close whine and which I recognized was a mortar. I dived for cover by a low wall, and the bomb landed very near enough to feel the draft. Snipers were taking pot shots at us, dodging and weaving through gardens and backyards. I came to stop opposite a factory, held up by heavy mortar and machine gun fire yet again. I threw myself into the ground. It was absolute bedlam, with the slicing sound of German Southern guns, their bullets cutting the air in every direction, and the repeated stonk of mortars, followed by the whine and sound of hot shrapnel hitting the rooftops. A small lump of shrapnel hit my helmet, sounding like a pea on a drum. In the heat of battle, men were shouting curses, lobbing grenades through open doors and windows, and following up with shrieks of contempt for the enemy and the cry of "Woo-hoo, Muhammad!" Casualties really began mounting. There were groans from men who had been hit. Motionless paras lay in the road and slumped over walls. I saw a pair of feet protruding from a garden gateway, one boot blown off but leaving the foot complete. Such was the magical phenomenon of war. The German firepower was murderous, and all I could do was keep alert for the sound of English. I had a horrible feeling that my battalion was being cut to ribbons. Going forward a little bit, there was a heck of a battle going on inside the factory, and men were scrapping furiously with grenades, Stens, Colt handguns, and fighting knives. The wall of the house opposite received a blast of machine gun fire coming from behind me. I was about to move off in pursuit of a German in the garden of a terraced house on my right when I felt an explosion just beneath me and a sharp pain. Reeling over and looking down, I saw that the lower part of my right leg was in a most unusual position and blood was oozing out, steady and fast. I shouted for help, and 2 paras dashed up quickly and rendered first aid. One of them, Sergeant Nobby Hall, called for a medical orderly. I was worried but felt like a nuisance, as everyone was busy enough already without being lumbered with me. I was placed on a stretcher and carried into a wooden shed a few yards away, where medics cut the boot off of the foot of my shattered leg, smashed by an explosive bullet. It looked awful, but strangely I didn't feel much pain. They tore open the field dressing I had carried for so long in different parts of the world, but never previously needed, and carried out a quick but thorough job. Pandemonium was reigning outside so at this point, obviously he's been wounded really bad. His leg is in very rough shape. He can't walk. Pandemonium was raining outside as machine gun fire echoed around the built-up area. A mortar bomb landed quite near, but the medic administrating a morphine injection kept a steady hand as if he were in the safety of a hospital back in England. So the talk about detaching, the medic is just cool and calm. While the other medic hunted around for suitable makeshift splint, a young Dutch girl appeared from nowhere and offered me a welcome cup of water. I was feeling cold and clammy, and her help was a great comfort, as was the morphine, which soon began to take effect. There was another series of explosions just ahead, a clear signal to get moving, and I was carried cautiously to the corner of a house next to the road I had come down only a short while ago. Everyone was scattered, and there were dead paras in the road, on the sidewalk, and in the gardens. Snipers were busy, and our men were bent on winkling them out. There was a thud, a whiz, and a bark of an exploding shell, followed by another and another, all bursting on the rooftops of houses 30 yards back. Then something flashed from an upper window only 20 yards ahead, and bullets splattered on the wall above us. The medic set me down to wait for an opportune moment to get across the road, and I saw 4 paras press themselves into the wall of the building opposite as they worked their way toward that flash. Went under the window, the leading para kicked the door out, and out of the window came a potato masher, which he immediately picked up and threw back in. The potato masher is the classic German grenade with a long handle on it, which they did so that they could throw grenades as far as the Americans could, because we play baseball and they play soccer, and you don't kick grenades. You have to throw them.
Yeah.
The leading para kicked the door, and out of the window came a potato masher, which he immediately picked up and threw back in, accompanied by a Mills bomb, which is their grenade, thrown by another man. There was quite some explosion, following which 4 paras entered the building, spraying Sten gun fire in the room and threw the floorboards, a trick we had learned in training. I was more than relieved to get out of the line of fire and was carried into the relative safety of a garden wall. As I lay helpless behind the wall, I had a clear view of the clatter and confusion of the battle and through the demolished gateway. So he goes on here. Obviously, I'm not covering the whole book, but covering some sections of things that are unfolding. I was moved with a number of other wounded men to a nearby barn, where I spent a fairly easy night thanks to the powerful effects of the morphine injection I had been given. Early the following morning, all was reasonably quiet in the immediate vicinity, although I could hear the sound of battle not far off. Looking around the barn, I didn't recognize anyone from my 1st battalion, and those men I spoke to did not want to know. They were either too preoccupied with their wounds or unable to talk at all. Some of them looked as though they had just lived through a nightmare, which I would say is an accurate statement. And again, it's like everything that he's talking about is just, complete mayhem combat. That's what he's talking about. It's just totally out of control. And finally, it settles down a little bit for that night. And it sounds like maybe probably the Brits at that point had done a good counterattack, maybe established a perimeter. Unfortunately, doesn't last. At about 0700, 2 medics came up to me and said that my turn was next. This is as they're trying to extract him. Lifting the stretcher, they carried me to a waiting Jeep, its engine running. There were 4 walking wounded in the backseat, and I was strapped to the front of the bonnet alongside another chap who was already strapped in on beside the windscreen. He forced a grin. "What's yours?" I asked. "They got me in the guts," he said bluntly. That's a nasty place to cop it, I thought, feeling sorry for him. A short, stocky medic jumped in the driver's seat, saying, "Hold tight in the back and don't worry you 2 in front on the bonnet. We might have a rough ride, and it will be a bit fast." What do you even do? I mean, they put you on a stretcher on the hood of a freaking Jeep. And they're like, and the medic says, "Hold on" to the guys in the back and says, "Hey, up front, don't." They've got them strapped down. There's nothing they can do. They can't move. I wouldn't want to do that on a Tuesday afternoon.
No.
Going to the market. No. I mean, imagine I'm like, "Hey, Echo, I want to take you to the market." I put you on the hood of my car, strap you down, and say, "Hey, it's going to be a little rough." Mm-hmm. After a fast bumpy journey, the Jeep tore through Oosterbeek, past the divisional headquarters at the Hartenstein Hotel, and pulled up sharply in the drive of the Tafelberg Hotel a few hundred yards farther on. Airborne medics quickly unstrapped me and took me inside, setting me down on the floor opposite a window in the entrance hall. The Hotel Tafelberg had been German Field Marshal Walther Modell's headquarters prior to our arrival the previous Sunday, and we were now using it as an improvised military hospital. It must have taken a few knocks, as it was now an absolute shambles. As usual, the British Tommy had managed to brew up, even in such hazardous conditions, and I was given a mug of tea and a bar of chocolate, my first food since leaving England 2 days earlier. I had not touched my ghastly iron ration. I tried to sleep, but with the interruption of shelling and mortar fire prevented that. When night fell, I just longed for daylight to come again. I hated the nights. It was bad enough to be meeting angry Germans in battle, but it was worse to do so while I slept. The next day, Wednesday, I was grateful to be taken into the operating room, ingeniously rigged up in the kitchen of the hotel. So he gets some preliminary work done on his wounds. And of course, the Brits, I know I've talked about this, they like to brew up their tea, and they will do it. That's how they roll. I was returned to the entrance hall where the din of battle and bullets hitting the wall outside made me look out. I was surprised to see a German wandering about. So picture this, you're in a hospital, you just got like the shrapnel cut out of your leg, they take and set you down, and now you're watching the battle out a window and you see a German wandering around. He took up a stand position by the door and then began pacing up and down. Just then there was a loud crump outside and debris, plaster, and glass fell all around. I looked to see where that one landed, and the German I had seen outside only a few moments ago was now sprawled out, killed, I presume by one of his own mortar bombs. But that should tell you the situation they're in. There's Germans outside the window, walking around. I was set down at the head of the stairs. To my right lay a glider pilot who had a face and arm injury. Amid all the wounded, who covered most of the landing area, came a wounded man walking. Our eyes met. Did I know him? I hardly knew anyone. They were unrecognizable, clotted up with blood and dirt. Then, up the stairs, belted some combat paras, and we asked them how it was going. And I had to capture this because this is just as British as it gets. So there's, like we just said, there's Germans walking around outside. This place is total shambles, and they see a couple paras, and he says, "Hey, how's it going?" And one of the paras answers, "Not too bad, not too bad. Could be a bit better." Before disappearing back down again. That's like that's a no-factor response. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, by the way, we're about to get overrun, but not too bad. Could be better, but we got this. Fast forward a little bit. A wounded man with his arm in a sling approached me with an inquiring look. "What unit, chum?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "First para," I replied, amid a shower of dust and smoke as yet another shell exploded very near. He winced and withdrew from the direction of the shell blast, just as we felt the ominous vacuum of warm air. He was almost incoherent as he glanced around the terrible scene of man-made destruction. "I just left the bridge," he said. There was quite a pause. "What's it like there?" I asked. He swung around, glaring at me as if the whole war was my fault, his eyes hard, staring and red with fatigue. The poor fellow had been hit through with something bad. I offered him a cigarette, and with a trembling hand he took one. It hung limp in his grasp. "Thanks. I don't really smoke, but I'll have one," he said. Then he answered, "It was bloody hell there. Tanks belching fire, blokes getting killed left and right. The carnage was terrible." He paused as a medic passed by with a man clutching his side and hobbling on one leg, a bloody congealed bandage wrapped around the stump where once had been a foot. My lad drew hard on the cigarette and, coughing, continued. There were hordes of them. It went on for hours, attacking, shelling. Then the bastards started burning us out. My two mates got killed. The twisted and broken bodies of our men were strewn everywhere. He leaned back against the wall, looking a little more at ease. I don't know, but I think I may have been the first person he had spelt out his experiences to. Later he told me that it was his first time in action. I thought he had ridden it bloody well. The next few days seemed to drag on forever, with my leg giving me much more pain now than it had during the first 24 hours after I was hit. And so obviously these guys are rallied up and they're suffering, but it doesn't mean that they're safe. Continuing on, there were so many shells landing in, on, and around the building, plus the occasional burst of machine gun fire spattering the inner walls, that I imagine we must be slap bang in the front line or somewhere in no man's land. And by the way, that's the field hospital. There were hundreds of wounded, enemy included, as well as Dutch people caught up in the fight, so many that some got moved to the hotel's annex across the driveway, and any man with flesh wounds or injuries that did not hinder the use of a firearm was ordered outside to fight. So if you could fight, now it's time.